Hello and welcome to Cooking the Books with Heather. This week we're going to be taking the leftover pork from the pork shank that we made previously, and we're going to be using it in a different recipe, and we're going to be making pork and dumplings with stewed tomatoes and butter beans. Now, I have to admit, I'm making a few substitutions in this recipe. I'm not making the stewed tomatoes from the book because it's not tomato season and I just didn't feel like making a whole bunch of it, but we had the pork, so I'm gonna go ahead and use some canned stewed tomatoes and add some onion to that because her recipe for stewed tomatoes includes some onions. So I'm gonna doctor those up a little bit. So it won't be exactly right, but I think it'll be close enough. And I could not find the pasta flour, the super fine, the 00 flour that she calls for the dumplings. So I'm just gonna be using regular all-purpose flour and I'm sure it'll be fine. Doing what we can in this time. So the first thing is we're going to make dumplings. This is, they seem to be basically a ricotta gnocchi. It's a ricotta base with some flour and some eggs and some salt, and that's about it. I've never made pasta, homemade pasta before, but I have made gnocchi. I don't remember if I've made ricotta gnocchi, but I've made like a sweet potato, no, not sweet potato, butternut squash gnocchi, which were delicious. So to get started, we're going to mix our ricotta, which I've already measured out, with some salt and eggs. So mostly yolk, but we're gonna do one whole egg here. And then the rest are just the yolk. So the way I do that is just with the shell, and hopefully it will crack. Of course, this one is didn't super cooperate, but still works. So I'm just gonna leave the white in this bowl and dump the yolk. Getting a little bit of the white is okay. There is egg white in this recipe. It's not gonna be a big deal. So, there we go. Now our first step, I'm gonna go wash my hands because they're all eggy. One second. So our first step is just to mix this thoroughly. I'm gonna call that pretty thoroughly mixed. The next step is to pass all of this through a fine mesh sieve, I guess to make sure it's all broken up and smooth as possible. So let me clean up a little bit. So I have this larger bowl here with the largest sieve that I have, and I'm just going to put all of this through there in batches if I must, and force it through. It's probably gonna be in batches because you don't want too much in there at once. So you just sort of stir and stir and stir and force it through. That's not too bad. Pretty much the same thing we did with the roasted garlic for the roasted garlic butter, which we are also, I believe, going to be using in this recipe for the sauce. Okay, so now we have this mixture that we passed through the sieve, and we're gonna add a measured amount of flour to it. So like I said, this is supposed to be 00 flour used for pasta, whatever. I'm just using all-purpose. I maybe should have sieved it, but I didn't, and now it's too late. I'm just gonna mix this thoroughly. And just FYI, that was a whole milk ricotta cheese, not a part skim or anything, so. Anyway, all right, it's still pretty sticky, but I think that's okay. I think that's what we're going for this. We're going to be putting it down on a heavily floured surface. So I'm gonna get ready for that. You're supposed to pipe this. I don't have a piping bag with a 3/4 inch round tip. We're just gonna use a plastic zip top bag. So I'm gonna get that, put this in here, and be right back. So I have just turned the top of the zip top bag down so I don't get it on the zip top area. My scissors cut it open when it comes time, but I'm just gonna scoop all this in there. It says a heavily floured surface, and you're going to be sort of rolling the lengths of dough in the flour. So I'm gonna use a lot of flour here, I think. So I've got a baking rack just to put them on when they're done, because I'm going to roll them all out and get them ready before we cook them. You can do most of this in advance. So you can do the dumplings up to like 2 days in advance. You can have the butter beans cooked and the stewed tomatoes ready, and then you can put it all together. And at the end, it is only supposed to take about 10 minutes to get all together. We'll see if that's right, but this part will take a while. So, got my bench scraper, got my kitchen scissors. I'm going for a 3/4 inch opening, so I'm gonna, that's probably about good. She says 8-inch lines. I'm gonna do 2 at once just to see, because the next thing we do is kind of roll these in the flour to get them covered. It's not too bad, not too hard. All right, and then I'm gonna put these a little closer together. So we cut these into 1-inch pieces. I'm gonna cut them in 1-inch pieces. I'm gonna scrape them up and put them on my baking sheet, and I'm gonna keep doing this until we're done with this dough. Good enough. They're very sort of soft, so I'm trying to be careful, but it's not too bad. They get a little sticky on the ends where they're cut. She says to use a sharp knife, but I think my bench scraper probably works just as well as a knife, honestly, for that. So just keep going at this point. All right, so I made about a whole sheet pan's worth of dumplings, ricotta gnocchi, whatever you want to call them. And next we're going to get some water boiling on the stove, salted of course, and we're going to cook these. See you at the stove. Our water is boiling, we've salted the water, and we're going to drop these just a few at a time in here so that they don't stick, and hopefully they're not going to stick to the baking dish or each other, since I put them sort of willy-nilly on there. And we're going to cook them for about 3 minutes each batch. And I have a prepared baking sheet over here with lined with paper towels. To put them on when they are done. I think that's almost enough for this batch. Just don't want to spend too long putting them in there so that the first ones get way overcooked or anything. Since these are a fresh dough, they don't take that long to cook, thus the sort of 3 minutes. And I have sort of something with a big spoon with a bunch of holes in it to take them out with. So I'm just gonna wait until I think they're all done. They mostly will start floating generally when they're done. And so most of them are starting to come to the top, you can see. And I'm just gonna wait about 3 minutes, about 2 more now, really. And so we're gonna let them cool on this baking sheet. And then when we're all done with everything, we're going to put them in a bowl and toss them with oil so that they don't stick together. And then they'll be ready for us whenever we're ready to put them in the sauce. They've all sort of started floating around the sides, so I would say they're pretty much done at this point. I'm gonna give them another 30 seconds or so, because that'll be the sort of 3-minute mark, just to be sure. As long as they don't start falling apart, we're fine. All right, I'm gonna start taking them out. I'm just putting them sort of separately on the paper towel lined baking sheet. And keep doing this again and again and again and again until they are all cooked. So 1 batch down. While this batch is cooking, I'm gonna go ahead and start taking some of the first ones up and putting them in the bowl, just because I don't have a whole lot of space. They're sticky at this point, so they're kind of sticking to the paper towel, but not too bad. But I'm gonna get a layer in here and add a little bit of the oil, and then another layer and a little bit of oil and that kind of thing, just so they won't stick to each other too badly. Kind of feel like I should have put some oil in the bowl, but I didn't, so oh well. All right, we're done with the dumplings. I need to just finish letting them cool off and transferring them to my bowl with the oil. We're gonna clean up a little bit and be back here to make the butterbeans. Butterbeans are next. The next step in this recipe is to cook the butterbeans. Now she calls for fresh. We had some we had blanched and frozen last summer in the freezer, which is good because it's not quite bean season here in North Carolina. I measured out the amount of butter beans that she calls for and added the water. It's like 2 cups of water basically to cover it. And we're going to bring this to a boil. There's no salt in this, no seasonings at all currently. We're gonna bring it to a boil and boil it for 25 to 30 minutes until they're pretty much done before we season it at all. So I'm gonna go ahead and start bringing that up to a boil. So in the end, they're going to be, you're gonna hold their shape, but be tender throughout. When that happens, we are going to drop in a small sachet, which is also in the book. I'm not making a video about that. It's really just bay leaf, peppercorns, thyme, and a garlic clove. She has a large sachet recipe in there as well. It's supposed to be in cheesecloth. I still don't have cheesecloth. Forgot about it, whatever. But I did have these little tea bags that I got for my husband to make spiced cider. So you put the mulling spices in and then you don't have to worry about straining it out. You can make it on a single cup basis. And it's sort of the perfect size for this small sachet. So when this is done, when they are tender throughout, about 25 or 30 minutes, turn off the heat. I'm probably not going to show you this part because it's super easy. You turn off the heat, drop this in, put in the salt that the recipe calls for this step. Whew. It's a little wet. Put in the sachet and the salt, and you let it go at room temperature to cool to room temperature. And by that time, we'll probably be about ready for putting it in the rest of the dish. So, yeah, right now we're gonna cook the butter beans. And then we're gonna season them after they're done cooking. I think, like most beans, the goal here is to let them get tender, because sometimes salt keeps beans from getting tender when you're cooking them. We don't usually have that problem with this kind of fresh bean, but we're gonna follow the recipe. We're gonna do it the way she says, and that's what we're gonna do right now. So when the butter beans were done, I added the sachet and the salt and let it sit until it cooled to room temperature. And because I'm not using her stewed tomato recipe, I used some canned stewed tomatoes that we got at the grocery store, which also have celery in them, which whatever. So this was me sort of faking the flavors in her stewed tomatoes. I grabbed the sachet, you can kind of see here, out of this after we strained them and put them in the stewed tomatoes. And also I sauteed some minced yellow onion first. And so I've just been letting those kind of hang out and get a little bit of those flavors, so we'll be as close as possible without actually making the recipe. If I do end up making the recipe, hopefully I'll remember to come back and link it down below. But stewed tomatoes. And now we're gonna put this all together. So what I'm gonna do is put the butter beans in here. And I'm gonna take the sachet out because I think we're done with that now. That string, there we go. Just put that there. So that's done. Oh, and now we add some of the cooking stock from the pork that we are using, the leftover pork shanks. So I saved some cooking stock. I thought I saved way more than I should, but a lot of that turned out to be sort of fatty bits, and so, or like it rose to the top and it was kind of congealed, and I'm not sure about it being actually the cooking liquid, whatever. I froze it, it separated. I used mostly the liquid part, not the fat that floated to the top. Maybe right, maybe not, I don't know. But now we're gonna let this come up to a simmer on medium-low heat. Shouldn't take too long because the tomatoes were already simmering. I think after that, we just add all the other stuff into here. Give me 1 second. All right, this is starting to get bubbly, and the next thing I need to do is stir in roasted garlic butter. So we made that before, I'll link it down below. So I've got roasted garlic butter and we've got some plain butter here that will go in later. I'm gonna put this back in the refrigerator because it's supposed to be cold, because we're gonna sort of mount the sauce with it. Okay, so it's my roasted garlic butter, and we're gonna stir this until it's completely incorporated before we add anything else. All right, looks pretty much incorporated to me, and now we add the dumplings and the pork. So this is a leftover pork shank. I kind of pulled it apart into bite-sized pieces and made sure I took out any bits that I didn't want to eat. Some of them are a little big, but that's okay. And we add the dumplings, which, there we go, good thing they're not all stuck together in one pile. And those were both in the refrigerator. So we need to just basically bring everything up to temperature at this point. She says about 4 minutes. Since mine were in the refrigerator, I'm thinking it might take a little bit longer, but we'll do it until it gets sort of bubbly. Just fold this in. Might need to get a different, yeah, I think I'm gonna need a different implement. So now we're just waiting until this heats up. And that's almost the dish. I am gonna go get my Parmesan out because she suggests that you serve this with finely grated Parmesan cheese on top. Sounds good to me. So everything is warm now. It's starting to bubble through all of the stuff. It's really not as sort of juicy as I expected. But the last step here, well, 2 steps. First, take it off the heat, and we add cold unsalted butter, and stir gently until it is combined. This is sort of, should sort of emulsify with the sauce and make it nice. A lot of her recipes end up with this. You have to be kind of careful with this one because of the dumplings. They're really pretty soft dumplings. You can see the cold sauce, the cold butter is melting pretty quickly, so it's warmed up. I think it took more like 10 minutes or so to get completely warm, with everything being pretty cold. All right. Just kind of making sure I don't see any. Oh, there's no, that's a dumpling. It's hard to tell the dumplings from pieces of butter sometimes, but I think I'm not seeing any pieces of butter. So the last thing to do is to season with some lemon juice. And I think I got lucky with the seeds on this one, and they mostly got in the other half, thankfully. So there's that. I'm just gonna stir it up a little bit, and we're gonna call it done. Serve it with Parmesan on top in big bowls. That's it. We'll let you know how it turned out. On this episode of Cooking the Books with Heather, you watched me make pork and dumplings with stewed tomatoes and butter beans from Ashley Christensen's Poole's Diner cookbook. So I was a little afraid of the dumplings because really they were sort of like a gnocchi, a ricotta gnocchi, but they actually went a lot better than I expected. They weren't that difficult, even though it did kind of require sort of the sieving the ricotta mixture. That was a little, but it went okay. It wasn't as hard as it was to do the roasted garlic butter. And then it's just, you know, making them, rolling them all out. It didn't take that long. It was kind of therapeutic, get into a rhythm of it, and it was okay. So that was actually a lot better than I expected. And then everything else was really easy. Didn't require any special equipment, really. Yeah, it was really pretty good. And like I said, I didn't use her stewed tomatoes, but I think we got the gist of the dish, and everybody liked it. My husband would have preferred maybe a little bit of a spicier sauce for the dumplings, but that's him. He likes spicy, and I think we had some ricotta gnocchi from a local restaurant recently that did have sort of it was just the gnocchi with some sauce, and the sauce was a little bit spicy, kind of a spicy tomato sauce, which he enjoyed. I enjoyed too. But I think all in all, it was a good use of the leftover pork, and it was a nice hearty dish, maybe a little bit better for a cooler weather than we have right now. But it was really good, and it was less time intensive than I expected, and then some of the recipes have been, and it wasn't very fiddly. So yeah, we enjoyed it. I hope if you decide to try it, you enjoy it too. And if you enjoyed watching me cook this, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and come back and watch me make something else next week.